Hasulam by Shlomo Katz. How's everybody doing? Great to be with you on a Monday night. Let's light up the darkness. Let's keep it moving. We're doing the whole daf. It's a big daf. There's lots to cover. Stephen in New Hampshire is with us. So is Yehuda in Florence, South Carolina. Paul in the Great Northwest. Sharon in New Jersey. Bella in Florida. PK in Colorado. Renee in Indiana. Paul in Chicago. John in Maine. Gwen in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Nancy in North Carolina. Paula in time with the music. In time with the class. Lucy in Minnesota, Charles in Kansas, Hannah in New York, Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in mid-Missouri. Today's title reminds you of that old apocryphal quote from Bismarck: God protects drunks, fools, young lovers, and the United States. I love it. PK loves the music. Rebecca's in LA. Aaron says, Shalom Salanina. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you with us. Today's daf, Yud Gimel, page 13, here in Tractate Yevamos. We're finally going to conclude, almost 2 weeks into it, our discussion of the first Mishna of our tractate. This was the list of women who are prohibited to enter yibum when their husband dies childless and there's a surviving brother. These women are prohibited to marry that brother because they have some other kind of relationship with him or prohibition, and they exempt their co-wives. So we're finally going to conclude this discussion. And yesterday we were talking about refusal, right? So this is going to come up several times today, this idea, very shocking to the modern ear, that a minor, a girl, a child would find herself married to a man, but that she had the right to refuse him. So remember, we're dealing with the ancient world here. Very important to realize that it is a basic law of Judaism that you cannot disobey the law of the land, okay? So there is no permit in Judaism, for an adult man to marry a child, okay? It doesn't happen anymore. In the ancient world, what there really was betrothal. And so, even like a girl before, she was an adult, her father might betroth her to some man. Lots of marriages, had political ramifications, property ramifications, as well as coupling ramifications. So there could be a betrothal, but what was so interesting is that the Torah granted this minor girl the right to refuse the marriage. And if she refused this man to whom her father, perhaps, or her mother or her brothers had betrothed her, she has the right to refuse the man, and it's like she was never married to the man. She's not considered a divorcee. It's as if there never was a marriage. So we're talking about this subject of refusal. And so what we learned in our Mishnah is that if there were two wives of a man and he died childless and there's a surviving brother, if one of those wives was actually a minor, he had never consummated the marriage with her, and I think even if he had, that she could refuse him. She could walk away from that marriage, and it's as if she was never married. And then the question is the co-wife then exempt from yibum or chalitza? And the answer is because a minor who refuses, it's as if she was never married, the co-wife is qualified for yibum. She is not exempt from yibum like in the cases of other co-wives who exempt. This co-wife of the minor who refused does come up to the Yevamos, the surviving brother, for yibum. Now that we've been talking about the case of refusal, and that's what refusal means in this context, the Gemara cites a related law, right? So it's really a digression. It's not meant to prove something about the right of refusal and its impact on the co-wife. It's a related law. So Rav Bevai taught a baraisa before Rav Nachman. 3 women may engage in relations with a contraceptive resorbent, which is a soft fabric placed at the entrance to their wombs to prevent conception, despite the fact that this practice is generally prohibited. Now, the general questions about Judaism and contraceptives, which for the most part are prohibited, but are certainly permitted in certain cases. And right here, we're talking about that these three women are permitted to use contraceptives. But the broader questions about Judaism and contraceptives, way above my pay grade. This is not a class on Judaism and contraceptives. If this is something that is of interest to you, this question, Google the question, go particularly to Chabad.org. There's all kinds of sources with extensive literature and writings on this subject. That's not what we're talking about here, okay? So on the very limited question that incidental to the law of refusal, and we'll see how this is connected, now the Mishnah mentions that there's a Baraisa in which it said that although women generally may not use contraceptives, and the reason is because a man is not allowed to waste his seed, right? To engage in a practice that is going to resemble onanism, right? That you waste your seed, taken from the name of Onan, the second brother of the sons of Judah, right? The first one was married to Tamar. He died. Then she came. Then Onan performed yibum with her, married her. That's the levirate marriage. But even though he maybe was forced into that by his father, he didn't want to build up his brother's house. I mean, he married. Why do you marry the brother's widow? In order to build up your brother's house. That the first child from that union should be the heir of your brother who died without having children. But the second brother, Onan, didn't want to do it. Right? And so what did he do? He poured his seed on the ground. And the Torah says this angered God, and then Onan died early. And now two brothers had died of the same wife, Tamar, and then Judah didn't want to give the third youngest brother to her, and that led to the events of the Judah and Tamar story. At any rate, a man is not supposed to waste his seed, and using a contraceptive or certain kinds of contraceptives, will inevitably destroy the seed, and that is the Torah issue there. Okay. But here what we're talking about is three women may nevertheless, despite that prohibition, they may use the contraceptive. And in this case, it's a resorbent, which is a soft fabric placed at the entrance to their wombs to prevent conception. This is the ancient world. They didn't have access to all the different kinds of contraceptives that we have today. Was this an effective contraceptive? Certainly, debatable. But that is outside the scope of today's class. The point is that these three women were permitted to use a contraceptive, even though generally you're not allowed. Who were these three women? A minor, a woman who is already pregnant, and a nursing woman. And the Baraisa specifies the reason for these exceptions. Why was a minor permitted to use a contraceptive? Why the minor? A minor may use the contraceptive lest she become pregnant and perhaps die, right? So it's a minor who's old enough to become pregnant, but understood in the ancient world that she might become pregnant, but it was too dangerous for her to become pregnant, so we don't want her to become pregnant. Note that the assumption in this whole learning is that the only people who are having sex are married people, right? So she's married to her husband, even though it happened at a young age. That doesn't happen in modern times, but it did happen in the ancient world. But the minor could use the contraceptive so that she should not become pregnant because the pregnancy would endanger her. Second, a woman who is already pregnant, because according to their understanding, a woman who is pregnant could sort of become pregnant again, and there would be already an embryo growing within her, a fetus, and then a second fetus. It doesn't matter that the science might hold that this is unlikely. Just if so, this would be the case. And so the concern was that a second fetus could take root in her womb, and that the growing new fetus would get crushed or would crush the fetus that was already there. get crushed by or would crush, right? These competing fetuses, but not in a twins situation, right? Becoming impregnated at different times. And the third woman who could use a contraceptive is a woman who is nursing. And this kind of makes sense according even to the modern mind. Why should a woman who is nursing not be allowed to use a contraceptive? Because the nursing woman, lest she become pregnant and her milk dry up, in which case she will wean her son too early, thereby endangering him, and he will die. Right? So in all three cases, there's a danger. It's all about danger, right? So in order to save a life, you're going to override what would otherwise be a Torah prohibition. And the Baraisa continues. Now, who is considered a minor? Who is a minor for purposes of this law? It is a girl from the age of 11 years and 1 day until the age of 12 years and 1 day. If she was younger than this or older than this, she may go ahead and engage in relations in her usual manner. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Since it is assumed that a minor who is less than 11 years old cannot become pregnant, she is considered to be in no danger. And the rabbis say both this one and that one, i.e. in all these cases, she may go ahead and engage in relations in her usual manner. And heaven will have mercy upon her and prevent any mishap, since it is stated, the Lord preserves the simple. I want to re-emphasize. The Talmud is not saying, it is permitted to have sex with a child who's even less than 11 years old. We're talking about in the ancient world, and we're talking about in the absence of other factors, right? Like it's illegal to have sex with a minor. They're talking about just from a Torah standpoint, what particular prohibitions are in play, right? And since in the ancient world, it was permitted to marry a child, then if marital relations happened, then what was being violated and what wasn't. People like to, attack the Talmud and say, the Talmud says you can have sex with little girls. No, it does not. It does not say that because, number one, you cannot violate the law of the land, right? And the law of every land in the world says you cannot have sex with children. So you cannot have sex with children. I don't really think I need to say that again, but just to be clear. The Gemara analyzes the Baraisa. From the fact that the Baraisa states, lest this girl become pregnant and perhaps die, this indicates by inference that there is a minor who can become pregnant and will not die. Although the conditions for this scenario of a minor giving birth and surviving are unclear. And if so, that a minor might be impregnated and give birth, we find the case of one's mother-in-law who refused her husband. Since it is possible for a woman to give birth to a daughter while still a minor, if a man betroths his daughter while she's still an infant, the mother might become a mother-in-law who performed refusal. Right? If you can have a baby and still be a minor, then you can still perform refusal, right? As if the marriage never existed, even though the woman got pregnant, the girl got pregnant and had a baby. If it's possible to have a baby and still be considered a minor, right? And that's what they're sort of arguing about now. And yet we learned in the Mishnah, you cannot say, i.e. the possibility does not exist in the case of his mother-in-law, his mother-in-law's mother, and his father-in-law's mother, who are all prohibited to the surviving brother in case of yibum, that they were found to be an alonis or performed refusal, right? These are, if the one wife was found to be an alonis or she was a minor who performed refusal, then it's like that marriage never existed, and the co-wife does come before the Yavam for yibum. As refusal may be performed only by a minor who cannot give birth, right? You can say, how can you say that a woman who gave birth is a minor who can perform refusal? Once she's given birth, she's not a minor, according to this view. So if so, there is apparently a contradiction between the Mishnah and the Baraisa. And the Gemara answers, do not say, lest she become pregnant and perhaps die, which indicates that it is possible for her not to die from the impregnation. Rather say, lest she become pregnant and die. In other words, although it is uncertain whether or not she will become pregnant, if she does become pregnant, she will certainly die, which means that there is no case in which a minor could give birth and live and still be a minor. As Rabbi Bar Levi said, there is a limit with regard to her pregnancy, i.e. that of a young girl. Before this time, the age of 11, she cannot become pregnant. During this time, from age 11 to 12, she dies and her fetus dies. After this time, she's considered a legal adult and she lives, and she becomes pregnant, the baby will live as well. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty. Is that so? But didn't Rabbah bar Shmuel teach? You cannot say, in the case of his mother-in-law and his mother-in-law's mother and his father-in-law's mother, that they were found to be an elonis or perform refusal as they already gave birth. And this indicates that a minor can give birth, as otherwise he should have stated, as they are already mature. Rather, actually, the original version of the Baraisa is correct when it said, lest she become pregnant and perhaps die. But this is difficult with regard to the Mishna, which indicates that this scenario is impossible. So Rav Safra said, children are equivalent to signs of puberty. Meaning, until when is a girl considered a minor? Until she develops signs of puberty. Well, a big sign of puberty and that you're no longer a minor is that you became pregnant and delivered a living baby. So one who does that is no longer a minor, according to Rav Safra. In other words, a girl who get minor as defined in the ancient world. In other words, a girl who gives birth does not retain the legal status of a minor, as the very fact that she bore children is equivalent to a physical sign of maturity, which is usually understood to be, having hairs, two hairs in the pubis. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference that arises from the question of whether bearing children is equivalent or preferable to signs of maturity? And the Gemara answers, the difference is that even according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that a minor may perform refusal, right, get out of this betrothal, and no longer be married as if the marriage never worked, which only happens while that girl is still a minor. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, who said that a minor may perform refusal even after she develops the two pubic hairs until the black hairs of her genitals are more plentiful than the hairless skin. In the case of children, in other words, if she gives birth, then Rabbi Yehuda concedes that she is considered mature and she may no longer perform refusal. She may get divorced from the man, she may end the marriage through divorce, but she can't use the mechanism of refusal once she has given birth to a baby. And Rav Zevid said, there are no children without signs of puberty. In other words, if a girl gives birth, she definitely possesses the signs of puberty. And the Gemara asks, but if so, let us examine to see whether these physical signs are present so that there is no need to depend on a presumption. And the Gemara answers, we are concerned lest the pubic hairs that constitute the sign have fallen off. And the Gemara comments, well, this works out well according to the one who said that in general we are concerned lest the signs of maturity fall off, i.e. that there are cases in which she is in fact mature, but the signs of puberty, the hairs on the pubis have fallen off. We're on 13a. However, according to the one who said that if there are in fact hairs, they will certainly be found, and we are not concerned that they may have fallen out, well, what is there to say then? And the Gemara answers, well, even according to the one who said that in ordinary circumstances, we are not concerned that the signs of puberty were somehow erased, that they went away when she gave birth. In this case, due to the pain of childbirth, we are concerned that the signs of puberty, these pubic hairs, might have fallen out, and therefore it is impossible to examine the matter conclusively. That's as far as we're going to go into that topic. It'll come up again later in our journey through the Talmud. But now we're getting back to wives who are prohibited to the Yevamos who are prohibited to the Yavam and exempt their co-wives. The Gemara returns to the Mishnah. How do they exempt their co-wives and the co-wives of their co-wives? The Gemara asks, from where are these matters that not only is a co-wife exempt from yibum and chalitza, but even the co-wife of a co-wife is exempted as well? From where do we know this? Rav Yehuda said that this is as the verse states, and you shall not take a woman to her sister to be a rival. That's why we sometimes say rival wives instead of co-wives. This is where we get that prohibition from Leviticus 18:18. Meaning that you shall not marry a woman and her sister. But the Torah says, why? Because then you would have two sisters as rival wives to each other. And so that's why we call them rival wives. They don't have to be sisters. It's prohibited that they should be sisters, but therefore, two wives who are wives of the same man, we sometimes refer to them as co-wives, but the term really is rival wives. Okay? So from where is it derived? Rav Yehuda said, the verse states, and you shall not take a woman to her sister to be a rival, litzror, to her. And the term litzror is written with the letter resh appearing twice, rather than latzor with a single resh, which means that the Torah amplified and included many rival wives. In other words, this verse includes not only the rival wife of a forbidden relative, but also the rival wife of a rival wife, which can happen when two brothers die in sequence, and a wife becomes first a co-wife of one woman and then a co-wife of another woman, and then they're all going to be exempt in yibum when the second brother dies, or other brothers die down the chain. And Rav Ashi said it is a logical inference which does not require a source from the Torah. What is the reason that a rival wife of a forbidden relative is prohibited? The reason is that she stands in place of a forbidden relative. Since the forbidden relative caused her exemption from yibum, she too is considered a forbidden relative who remains categorized as a brother's wife. Therefore, the rival wife of a rival wife also stands in place of a forbidden relative, as she is like the rival wife of a forbidden relative and is therefore forbidden herself, right? So just to get the picture thoroughly in our minds, there's two brothers, right? One of them has two wives. That one who has two wives dies, okay? Now, one of those wives is related to his surviving brother in a way that the other co-wife is not, right? There's some kind of prohibited relationship. And so because this one wife is prohibited to the surviving brother, the co-wife is prohibited as well. That's what we're saying. Now, the Mishnah taught, how so? If the prohibited relative died, performed refusal, or was divorced, from that moment onward, their rival wives are no longer considered the rival wives of a forbidden relative, and they are permitted. In other words, this man who has two wives and then he dies, and then his wives come for, are up for yibum. One of them will perform yibum or chalitza with the surviving brother. But whether yibum applies or not, whether the co-wife applies or not, everything is sort of measured at the moment that the brother dies, the one without children, that when he dies, right? So if he divorced one of those wives before he died, so there is not a case of co-wives. They might have been co-wives, but at the moment that he died, he only has one wife, right? And if she has no other prohibited relationship with the surviving brother, then the surviving brother in this Yevamos will perform either yibum or chalitza. But if at the moment that he died, he had the two wives, one of them had not performed refusal, had not divorced, had not died before he did, that's where you have co-wives applicable. So the Gemara remarks, this legal ruling with regard to a divorce is presented as a general principle and is therefore correct, even if at the time that the deceased brother married the rival wife, he was married to the forbidden relative and ultimately divorced the relative, which means that for a period of time, the women were rival wives. Even under these circumstances, the prohibition of a rival wife of a forbidden relative does not apply, and she is permitted to enter into levirate marriage because at the time the brother died, right, the prohibited wife was not his wife anymore. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a different Mishnah, which we find on page 30a. We'll come to that eventually in 2 weeks, which discusses three brothers, two of whom are married to two sisters, and one is married to an unrelated woman. So I made a little chart here. All right. So we have this example. Reuven is married to Miriam, and Shimon is married to Dinah, and Yitzi is married to Eliza. Okay, and these dots indicate that. Well, just follow with me. There's brothers and sisters, right? The sisters are sisters of each other, and the brothers are brothers of each other. So that's why I have these dots. Shimon and Reuven and Yitzi are all brothers. and Miriam and Dinah are sisters. Eliza is not related to anyone other than being Yitzi's wife. Okay? So one of the husbands of the sisters subsequently divorced his wife. Okay. So Reuben, right here, divorces Miriam. Right? So this marriage no longer exists. She is a divorced woman. He is a divorced man. One of the husbands of the sister subsequently divorced his wife, and the one who was married to the unrelated woman died. Okay, so Yitzi dies. All right, then what? And the one who's divorced him, and the one who was married to the unrelated woman died, and the one who divorced his wife married the Yevamos. Okay, so then, Reuben is now a divorced man. He's single again. So he steps in and he marries Eliza. Okay, so he performed yibum. Now they are married. Very good. And then what? And afterward, he died as well. Okay, so then Reuben died. Poor Eliza, she's had 2 husbands die on her. 2 brothers have died on her. And which means that now Eliza once again comes for yibum to Shimon. Right, so Reuben is not up here anymore. He came down here. Okay, so the only surviving brother is Shimon. He's married to Dinah. And now, so Eliza is up for yibum. Miriam got divorced, so yibum doesn't apply to her. But Eliza now comes for either yibum or chalitza before Shimon. Okay? And what does that mean? Which means that this Yevamo once again came for yibum before the remaining brother who was married to one of the sisters. It is with regard to this case that they said that if they died or were divorced, their rival wives are permitted. This concludes the Mishnah, right? So what they're saying here is Eliza is going to be, she could now marry Shimon. There's no reason why she can't. They can perform yibum or chalitza, but she could end up over here. Okay, she's not Dinah's sister. She's unrelated. So he could be married to both of them. If, however, Reuben didn't divorce Miriam first, then things would be more complicated because when Yitzi died, right, and Reuben married Eliza, he would have still been married to Miriam, right? And because Miriam, and then when he dies, Miriam and Eliza would come for Shimon. But because Miriam's sister is married to Shimon, she can't marry Shimon, and therefore there's no yibum or chalitza for her, and therefore the co-wife, Eliza, also no yibum and no chalitza. Doesn't even apply. That, things would be left as they were at that point. Okay. So the Gemara infers from this Mishnah, the reason that she is permitted is that the Yavam first divorced his sister and only afterward married the unrelated woman. In this case, the unrelated woman was never actually the co-wife of a sister, despite the fact that they were at different times married to the same man. Right? He was first married to Miriam, they divorced, then later he was married to Eliza, but he was never married to both of them at the same time, so they're not co-wives. Despite the fact that they were at different times married to the same man. However, if the Yavam first married the unrelated woman and afterward he divorced the sister, then they would have been co-wives of that second husband, and she would not be permitted to enter into yibum because for a period of time she had been the co-wife of a forbidden relative. And these two Mishnayos apparently contradict each other. Rabbi Yirmiyah said this Mishnah is disjointed. I.e., the Mishnayos are truly incompatible. The Tana who taught this law did not teach that law. And the reason for the difference in opinions is that this Tana of the Mishnah here maintains that death causes her to come before him for yibum. In other words, the decisive moment that determines the obligation in or exemption from yibum is the moment of when the childless brother dies. Since in the case of the Mishnah here, she was not the co-wife of a forbidden relative at the time of his death, the prohibition does not apply to her. What if they had been co-wives for a while, but then he divorced her before he died, right? The second, right? So let's say he was still married to Miriam when he married Eliza before he died, and then he divorced Miriam. So they were co-wives for a time, but he divorced Miriam before he died. Then is Eliza prohibited or is she exempt from yibum and chalitza or not? This we're saying is what matters is at the moment of death, not the fact that they were, even though they were co-wives at one point, they were both married to him during his life. At the moment that he died, this divorce had already happened, and so she would not come before him for yibum. Rava said, well, actually, both Mishnayos represent the opinion of a single Tana, but he teaches the Mishnah employing the style of this, and it is unnecessary to say that. In other words, the Mishnah here is referring to a case where he first married and later divorced, while the Mishnah that deals with three brothers is speaking of a simpler, more obvious case, in which he first divorced and later married the second wife. In that case, Eliza is certainly permitted to the third brother. Accordingly, there is no real contradiction here between the Mishnayos as they utilize different styles of teaching. The Mishnah taught, and if any of these forbidden relatives was a minor who could refuse her husband, then even if she did not refuse him, her rival wife performs chalitza and does not enter into yibum. And the Gemara asks, and let the minor perform refusal now, thereby annulling the marriage retroactively after the death of her husband, and let her rival wife enter into yibum. Since this option is not accepted, well then let us say this supports the opinion of Rabbi Oshaya. Rabbi Oshaya said, a Yevama, the widow, who is a minor, can refuse the yibum betrothal of the Yavam. In other words, if he betrothed her, she is free to say that she does not desire to marry him, a declaration that severs any connection between them. But she cannot refuse his bond, provided that he has not performed a yibum betrothal, but rather they're simply, either they're bound to either perform yibum or chalitza, and they haven't done it yet. So the minor can't refuse the yavam at that point. If she doesn't want to be with him, she can perform chalitza, but she can't refuse him unless he first betroths her. Remember, he doesn't need to. A Yavama and a Yavam only need to sleep together to become married. They don't need to perform a betrothal first. But if they didn't have that betrothal, but if they did perform that betrothal, even though it was unnecessary, and then she refuses him, then she has severed the bond as if it never existed. But if he doesn't betroth her, she can't do the ritual of a minor refusing a husband, because this man is not her husband. He's just up for yibum with her. Provided that he has not performed a levirate betrothal, this minor Yevama cannot annul the ties between them through the mechanism of refusal, as theirs is not a bond of marriage, and the institution of refusal was established only with regard to marriage. According to this opinion, it is evident that a minor Yevama, who is a forbidden relative, cannot perform refusal so as to enable her co-wife to be subject to yibum. And the Gemara rejects this suggestion. No, it is possible that a minor Yevama can indeed refuse just the bond of yibum with no betrothal necessary. But the rival wife of a forbidden relative is different, as she is not permitted in yibum marriage, even if the forbidden relative herself can perform refusal. Why? As Rami Bar Yechezel taught in a Baraisa, if she refused the husband, thereby annulling the marriage, she is permitted to his father, as the marriage bond was entirely nullified retroactively, and she is not considered his daughter-in-law at all. If, however, she refused only the Yavam, she is forbidden to his father. Apparently, the reason is that at the moment of her coming before him, this is a woman, right, who married a man and then he died, so she can't marry that man's father, right? You can't, the father of your husband will always be prohibited to you. Even if your husband dies, you can't then go and marry his father. But if she was a minor that performed refusal with the son, then it's like she was never married to the son. And if later, she and that boy's father, the boy who died, the young man who died, if she and that man's father end up falling in love, they could marry because she was never married to his son. So she's, permitted to any other man in the world because she was never married, including a priest because she was never married, because she refused while she was still a minor. And so apparently the reason is at the moment of her coming before him in yibum, she had the appearance of a daughter-in-law, and since people will think she is his daughter-in-law, she is forbidden to his father, and here too at the moment of her coming before him for yibum, she had the appearance of his daughter's rival wife, and consequently the sages did not permit her to enter into yibum even if the other wife refuses her husband, a policy consideration for prohibiting the co-wife of a minor who performed refusal. Okay, that concludes Mishnah number 1 here in Tractate Yevamos. Mishnah number 2. 6 women with whom relations are forbidden, who were not enumerated in the first Mishnah, which listed 15 women and their relationships that exempt them from yibum and their co-wife as well. Here in Mishnah number 2, we're talking about 6 other cases. 6 women with whom relations are forbidden, who were not enumerated in the first Mishnah, are forbidden by prohibitions that are even more severe than the prohibitions listed in Mishnah number 1, because they may be married only to others and never be married to any of the brothers, the surviving brothers, due to the closeness of their relationship. However, this stringency entails a corresponding leniency. Since the law of yibum is entirely inapplicable in these cases, these women who have very close ties to the surviving brother would never be permitted to marry him, and therefore no yibum, no chalitza necessary, but their co-wives would be permitted to enter into yibum with the surviving brothers. And the 6 women with whom relations are forbidden are as follows. His mother, his father's wife, meaning, that if somehow a man was married to the mother of his brother, right? So that would be his mother, to the mother of his brother. I mean, how could that happen? Because obviously they're children of different mothers. So somehow this guy might have married the mother of his brother. He probably should never have done that. But at that point, if he dies, so then the widow, would come for yibum with who? The surviving brother. Who's the surviving brother? Her son. So obviously they can't get married. But it's such a severe prohibition that if the man who died had a co-wife who is not related in any other way except that she was his wife, she is not exempted from yibum or chalitza. She is eligible to perform yibum with one of the surviving brothers. Right, so who are these 6 relationships? His mother, his father's wife, his father's sister, his paternal half-sister, the wife of his father's brother, and the wife of his paternal half-brother. Each of these women with whom relations are forbidden is forbidden equally to all of the brothers, and the mitzvah of yibum is inapplicable, and therefore her co-wife is permitted to the surviving brothers. Now, up to this point, the discussions have been based on the assumption that not only may a forbidden relative not enter into yibum, but her co-wife is also exempt. That was obviously the assumption of the first Mishnah and all the discussions so far. However, this issue is actually subject to a long-standing dispute. It's Beis Hillel who say if the Yevama is prohibited to her Yavam, so therefore she's exempt from yibum and chalitza, then her co-wife is also exempt from yibum and chalitza. That's according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai disagree, right? That the 2 academies, the followers of Hillel and the followers of Shammai. Beis Shammai permit the co-wives to the brothers, as they did not accept the interpretation of the verses that indicates that co-wives are prohibited. And Beis Hillel forbid those kinds of marriages, therefore those co-wives are exempt. So the previous Mishnayos are in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel. So if any of the rival wives of the brother perform chalitza, Beis Shammai disqualify her from marrying into the priesthood, right? So if any of the co-wives of the brother perform chalitza, Beis Shammai disqualify her from marrying into the priesthood. A woman who has performed chalitza is like a woman who's been married and divorced, and a priest, a Kohen, cannot marry a woman who was married and divorced. As in their opinion, these rival wives were fit for yibum, which means that the chalitza was fully valid. Consequently, they are disqualified from marrying a priest like all other women who performed chalitza. And Beis Hillel deemed them fit, as they maintained that no legal act of chalitza was performed here at all. So if a woman who was the co-wife of a woman who was a Yevama, who was prohibited to the brother, so she's exempt from yibum and chalitza. The co-wife was exempt from yibum and chalitza, but that co-wife performed chalitza anyway. So Beis Hillel would say that this woman may marry a priest because since she was exempt from chalitza and she performed it anyway in error, she didn't do anything at all. It's like that chalitza didn't mean anything because it wasn't a required chalitza, so it was no chalitza, and that's why she's still eligible to marry a priest. And if they entered into yibum, Beis Shammai deemed them fit for priesthood, as in their opinion, this is a fully legal yibum. And Beis Hillel disqualified them because they engaged in licentious sexual relations as the rival wives of a prohibited relative. Beis Hillel, and we follow Beis Hillel, say that co-wife the co-wife of a woman who is exempt herself from yibum and chalitza because of a prohibited relation. So the co-wife is also exempt from both yibum and chalitza. And if she performed yibum anyway, if she broke the rules and performed yibum anyway, Beis Shammai say that's a valid marriage. Beis Hillel say no, that is not a valid marriage, and any sex which follows is adultery or illegal relations because this man and woman are not married in a valid way. And the Mishnah comments, although Beis Hillel prohibit the rival wives to the brothers and Beis Shammai permit them, and although these disqualify these women and those deem them fit, Beis Shammai did not refrain from marrying women from Beis Hillel, and nor did Beis Hillel refrain from marrying women from Beis Shammai. Furthermore, with regard to all of the disputes concerning the laws of ritual purity and impurity, where these rule that an article is ritually pure and those rule that it is ritually impure, they did not refrain from handling ritually pure objects, each with the other, as Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel frequently used each other's vessels. That concludes the Mishnah. In other words, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai disagreed about a bunch of stuff, but they maintained civil relationships and were able to, intermarry these two schools of thought. Their sons and daughters married each other, and they even, shared vessels and utensils, even though they had disagreements about the laws of Tuma and Tahara, ritual impurity and ritual purity. Right? A good model for, maybe a time when Republicans and Democrats, have broken relationships and bonds even within families. Look to Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who had violent disagreements in the study hall, but then left the dispute in the study hall and outside could maintain warm and collegial relationships. We're on 13b. The Gemara of Mishnah number 2. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said, what is the reason for the opinion of Beis Shammai that they allow the co-wives to marry the surviving brothers, even when the other wife is in a prohibited relationship that exempts her? As it is written, Deuteronomy 25:5, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to one not of his kin. And the term outside indicates by inference that there is a woman who is considered inside, i.e. a close relative of the Yavam, who is inside his family. And the merciful one states, shall not be married, and also to one not of his kin. In other words, even when one of the wives is a forbidden relative, the rival wife, the co-wife, who is outside the family of the Yavam, is obligated in yibum. And how do Beis Hillel respond to this argument of Beis Shammai? They require these passages for that which Rabbi Yehuda said that Rav said. As Rabbi Yehuda said that Rav said, from where is it derived? That betrothal is not effective in the case of a Yavama who did not perform chalitza, if the betrothal is performed by an unrelated man and not a Yavam. This betrothal is not valid at all. As it is stated, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside of the family to one not of his kin. This verse indicates that there shall not be, in her case, the becoming married to one not of his kin. In other words, a woman who is bound, a Yevama, a widow, who is bound to her Yavam, the surviving brother. And they must either perform yibum or chalitza. And before they do one or the other, she is betrothed by some other man, just some random guy that, she had warm relationship with, right? And they want to get married. But if they get betrothed to each other before she's released using chalitza from her yibum bond with the surviving brother, then that betrothal to the outsider guy is nothing. That betrothal does not take effect. It was an illegal betrothal because she has not yet performed chalitza with her yavam. That's why Beis Hillel used that verse from Deuteronomy 25:5, whereas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai interpret that verse to say that even though a Yavama might be prohibited to her Yavam, the co-wife is not. And how do Beis Shammai respond to this claim of Beis Hillel that the betrothal to the outsider is disqualified and illegitimate? They ask, is it written to the outside, lachutz, which might indicate betrothal to an unrelated man? It is actually written outside, chutza, which is an adjective describing this woman as one who is from the outside. And Beis Hillel, what is their response? They maintain that since it is written outside, it is considered as though it is written to the outside, as it is taught in a baraisa. So they're arguing about how this verse is formulated, whether it prohibits a woman who has, a Yavama, who has not yet had chalitza, to go betroth some other man. Is that what it says? Or does it say that, it's going to permit the co-wife? It's going to depend on the grammar of that verse, right? Where it says, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside of the family. Now, is it written, shall not be married to the outside, lachutz, which might indicate that she's prevented from having a betrothal to an unrelated man? No, it's actually written outside, chutza, which is an adjective describing this woman as one who is from the outside. And Beis Hillel, what is their response? Well, they say, since it is written outside, it is considered as though it is written to the outside. And as it is taught in a baraisa, Rabbi Nehemiah says that with regard to any word that requires the letter lamed at its beginning, it's a prefix that means the preposition to. The verse at times, when it's written in the Torah, sometimes instead of putting the lamed at the beginning to say, I'm going to the store, right, like the store, sometimes instead of formulating the word like that, putting the preposition at the front, sometimes in the Torah it will create the same meaning by putting the letter hey at the end of the word, but the meaning is the same. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, for example, the term to Elim in Exodus 16:1 can be rendered as Elima. Instead of saying le'elim, the Torah says Elima, but it means the same thing. Instead of le'elim. And in 1 Kings 2:8, it says Machanayim, and it becomes Machanaima instead of le'machanayim. And in 2 Samuel 17:24, it says Mitzrayim, and is rendered Mitzrayima instead of le'mitzrayim. And several other examples like that. And the Gemara asks, and Beis Shammai, from where do they derive the law that Rav Yehuda said that Rav said? And the Gemara answers, they derive it from the phrase, to one not of his kin. And this phrase indicates that marriage is invalid with an unrelated man. However, they learn a different matter from this word outside. And the Gemara asks, well, but if so, let Beis Hillel too derive this law from to one not of his kin. And the Gemara answers, yes, it is indeed so. They too infer it from this source. Then why do I need the term outside? This word was necessary to include a betrothed woman. With regard to a woman who was betrothed but not yet married to the deceased brother, although she is still technically outside his house, she is nevertheless obligated in yibum. And the other one, Beis Shammai, infers this halakhic ruling from a single superfluous letter, as instead of outside being written as chutza, it is written as ha-chutza. And as for the other one, Beis Hillel, they do not derive a law from the linguistic difference between chutza and ha-chutza, like chutza, outside, and ha-chutza, the outside, as they maintain that this is not a significant enough difference. Rava said The rationale of Beis Shammai for their opinion that rival wives are permitted in yibum is not due to a specific verse. Forget what we just said. Rather, Beis Shammai applied the well-known halachic principle that a prohibition does not take effect where another prohibition already exists. Since the first wife was already a prohibited relation to her brother-in-law during his brother's lifetime, the second prohibition of a wife's sister does not apply to her. Accordingly, her presence is entirely disregarded, as though there is no forbidden relative here to exempt the co-wife, and that's why the co-wife would remain permitted. The Gemara raises a difficulty. This works out well where the deceased brother had first married one sister, and afterward the surviving brother had married another sister. As in this case, it is possible to say that the prohibition of a wife's sister does not come and apply in addition to the prohibition of a brother's wife. However, if the surviving brother had married one sister and afterward the deceased brother had married another sister, in this case, the prohibition of a wife's sister precedes that of a brother's wife. How can it be said in this situation that this prohibition of a forbidden relative does not take effect where another prohibition already exists if it actually came first? Right? The two brothers married two sisters, then one brother died. At that point, this woman who comes before the Yavam, she is both his brother's sister. That gets overwritten because it's a yibum situation. But she's also his wife's sister, which we do not override, and that's why she's prohibited. The Gemara answers, since the prohibition of a brother's wife does not come and apply in addition to the prohibition of a wife's sister, the status of a brother's wife does not pertain to her, and she's not obligated in yibum with him at all. And this means that the other wife is a co-wife of a forbidden relative where no mitzvah applies, and that is why she is permitted to the Yavam, according to Beis Shammai. The Mishnah taught, if any of the rival wives of the brother, I think we're going to stop there. Yeah, we're going to stop right there so that I can answer a question or two and make it to Minyan. Okay, Tuesday there. Let me see if there are any questions. It's good I have to go to Minyan right this week because that for sure the classes can only be an hour long. Next week, the Minyan will start 5 minutes later as it gets later and later in the summer. On Yevamos 13, Sharon, if a woman is married, has a child, and is then widowed, she remarried, not a yibum, right? Because she's got this child. Her second husband then dies, and she has no children with him. Is there an obligation for yibum to carry on the name of the second husband? Excellent question, Sharon, and my understanding is yes. It doesn't matter that this woman already had children from her own previous marriage. Her second husband, he never had children. So when he dies, this wife, who already brings a child with her, right, because she was a single mom before the brother who died married her, now he dies. If he has a surviving brother, yes, right? Yes, she comes up for yibum with her yavam, because why? To build up the house of the brother who was her second husband, but who never had his own child, and therefore I think yibum applies. That would be my understanding of the situation. Yehudit, I've been wondering when the reference of brother from a yibum or chalitza perspective, if it refers to only a brother with the same father, or if it can refer to, if only the mother is the same. Right, yes. They can be maternal brothers, maternal half-brothers, or paternal half-brothers. And I believe that yibum does apply. I believe. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check. But that's a great question, and I think it does apply. And when we're talking about the prohibited relationships, there they do mention, whether it's paternal half or maternal half brother, maternal half sister, etc. Those are different variations of prohibited relationships. But in terms of does a half brother step in as the yavam for his half brother who died before having children, my thought is yes, but I want to double check. And finally, Ifa, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that in Judaism, a man may not have sex with a girl under 12 and one day. If this is incorrect, the brother may not consummate the marriage with a minor Yevama. Right, so I don't think that that's actually technically the law, right? I think what it is he can't marry her freely until she's 12 and 1 day, because at that point she's an adult, right? So at that point, she can accept the wedding proposal and get a ketubah, and it's like two adults marrying each other. But when she's still a minor, her father could marry her off to this man. And then, we would hope that this man would not have sex with this, very young child. And it's going to be illegal for many other reasons, but not, but since he could be married to her, there could be a consummation. Now, in practice, that didn't happen. They didn't do that, okay? It's just talking about what particular laws would be violated or not. Normally, if they made a betrothal while she was still a child, it would only meant that they were promised to each other and she couldn't, be given to some other man, but they would wait until she was an adult to actually have the wedding and then, try to have children and what followed after that. That's my understanding. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 14 at the regular time, 6 p.m.